Daniel Lacalle, welcome to our show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, in your view, to start with, what caused the UK's market turmoil?
Well, to start with, the market turmoil was caused by what is happening all over the world. It was happening in Japan. We're seeing how the yen has reached a 32-year low. We've seen how pension funds had to find new levels of collateral for higher margin calls. Margin calls are rising all over the world for extreme levels of debt. So it's basically the vacuum effect of the US dollar on the global economy as rates rise. What happens is that it all coincided with the presentation of a mini budget by the Prime Minister of the UK, the ex-Prime Minister, Ms. Liz Truss, which was a very misguided mini budget, but not the cause of the UK turmoil. The increase in spending added to a cut in taxes meant that the structural deficit was going to rise to 3% of GDP. But obviously, a structural deficit of 3% of GDP, as we all know in the United States, does not create such a massive market turmoil and pension funds selling gilts to find some liquidity.
So there was the mini budget, but what's your take on Liz Truss's economic policy overall?
I think it was very misguided. I think it was the typical idea that if you present a budget in which you massively increase spending, but you also add a few tax cuts, everybody will be happy, no? So the people that are suffering from high taxation will be happy, and the people that want more spending will be happy as well. But it's something that doesn't work, obviously. You cannot present a budget in which you're not looking for a way to fund those policies, no? So it was an ultra Keynesian plan that expected that boost to deliver higher levels of growth, but obviously that could be disguised to a certain extent in the years of very low rates and in the years of quantitative easing. But now, in a process of rising rates and shortage of liquidity, what happens is that such a budget is obviously creating a financial hole that is negative. But my big problem here is that I probably believe that I have the feeling that Liz Truss was not even convinced about this budget, that she added this set of massive increases in expenditure to a set of tax cuts without actually looking at the implications for growth and obviously for borrowing. Borrowing would rise to 3% of GDP.
And why do you think she would implement a strategy she doesn't believe in?
Because the Conservative Party in the UK has gone through a very strange process. No, the Conservative Party won with an absolute majority the last elections under Boris Johnson, with a policy that was sort of a halfway between what Labour, the left, and the traditional conservative policies were. They increased taxes, they increased expenditures. It was quite a populist, if you want to call it that way of presenting itself. However, that's not the way in which conservatives have historically presented their economic policies. The Conservative Party has always been about balancing the budget, about low taxation and controlled spending. And none of those three things were actually things that that this mini budget included. So it was almost like a way of pushing the Bank of England to continue to print money to finance the rising deficit of the government. And obviously that wasn't the case, and it certainly created some turmoil. But let's remember, the yen has fallen more than the British pound. The euro and the European bonds have fallen in line with UK bonds in an environment of rising rates and dollar vacuum, as I call it. No?
What's next for the UK's economy? do you think?
Well, I'm very worried, to be fairly honest, because in the UK, the narrative has fallen to the idea that the reason why the prime minister has had to resign was because of the tax cuts. So it seems like the problem is the tax cuts, yet the deficit increase came 65% from government spending increases. No, so I'm afraid that Labour is going to present a budget that is a budget proposal that is going to be more spending and more taxes, and that the Conservative Party is also going to present a budget with more spending but no tax cuts. No. So ultimately, the problem of the UK is that the promise that was presented when Brexit was announced, that the UK would become a pool of attraction of capital from the world, an environment that would be very positive for business, that would have low taxation and low levels of regulation as opposed to the European Union, is actually going the opposite way. So I don't know how can we see any of this as a positive going forward, because it doesn't seem to me like the Conservative or Labour Party are going to implement any sound monetary and fiscal policy.
Would you say this situation in the UK is a warning to other Western nations?
It is, absolutely. I think that one of the things that I find amusing, or at least concerning, is that in the Eurozone, what is happening in the UK has been perceived as some sort of, vindication of the evils of Brexit and how badly things are going in the UK. But the problem of 12 trillion euros of negative yielding bonds is in the Eurozone. And the bonds of Spain, Italy, the bonds of Germany, France, etc., have also been falling significantly this year, around 18, 17, 19% in different cases. No? So it's not a situation in which you're not going to see the same margin call problem that pension funds had in the UK, manifested in a different way, no? And it looks to me like the same as in the UK, Liz Truss sort of wanted to force the central bank, the Bank of England, to undertake more quantitative easing and more monetary expansion. It looks to me like the Eurozone countries that are looking at the UK as if this was something that is not happening elsewhere are doing exactly the same thing. So I'm very, very worried, both at the Eurozone, the UK, of course, but also Japan.
So what do you think should be done for the UK and for the rest of the Western world going forward?
Well, what should be done is not going to be implemented, so I'm going to say it anyway. If you have a supply problem, you have to implement supply-side policies. So what the world needs is to think less about central banks printing and lowering rates, thinking less about governments spending as if there was no limit to the budget. And the world needs to start looking at supporting the real economy, which is the fabric of society, small businesses, corporations, families, etc. The policies that have been implemented have generated more inflation, more debt, and less growth. And what we need is supply-side measures. Obviously, no one wants to do that. It seems that in the Western world, both Republicans and Democrats, or Conservatives and Labour in the UK, are all thinking about the same thing. Let's present a budget in which we spend more. Some of them increase taxes, others cut taxes, but the deficit, the structural deficit, remains elevated, and that is not going to solve anything of what has been created in this tsunami of monetary and fiscal policy that was created in 2020. And
so just in a practical sense, what would that solution look like?
Well, what we need to do, we certainly need to cut taxes. Absolutely we do, because the taxation in developed nations is extremely elevated and is reducing potential growth and employment. But also, we need to cut unnecessary spending. there's a lot of slack in the budgets that governments present, in which it seems that nothing can be reduced. It's incredible that after years of increasing government spending, there is no way that governments can find efficiencies and elements to reduce. In fact, governments like the United States government or the UK government have not only not reduced expenditure after 2020 and the COVID pandemic, but they continue to consolidate and increase spending. So for me, it's lower government spending, sound monetary policy, and a more attractive fiscal policy. But it doesn't seem like governments like that, because governments like to spend and to blame inflation on anything and everything except massive government spending and huge money printing.
All right, Daniel Lacalle, Chief Economist at Trusss.
Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your comments below, and keep defending freedom. Thank you very much.